in certain types of small businesses, like manufacturing and construction. Bill Dunkelberg is an economist at NFIB.
Those industries are just sailing along really well. They can't find the workers they need. They could grow more.
He thinks optimism, especially for businesses like restaurants and retail, will continue to trend down because a lot of business owners aren't confident the new normal is around the corner, and they definitely don't know what it'll look like. I'm Kristen Schwab for Marketplace.
We talked about a report from the Congressional Budget Office on the program yesterday. It was on the minimum wage, that report, and what it would mean economically to raise it to $15 an hour. About 1 million fewer people living in poverty, but also about 1.5 million fewer jobs was one of the key takeaways. Now, whether an increase is going to wind up in the next relief bill is, of course, still up in the air. But for now, the Dems are pushing it. And if it happens, among many other workers, waiters, bartenders, and others who get tipped income would be covered. And it'd get rid of the national tipped minimum wage, too, which right now is just $2.13 an hour. Not a typo there, $2.13 an hour. The idea has been for years now that people would make up the difference in tips. But where did that idea come from in the first place, do you suppose? Marketplace's Jasmine Garst has the answer.
If you have ever waited tables, you might have experienced this feeling of dread. Tourists walk in from a part of the world like, say, Europe, where tipping is not the norm. Which is funny because experts say tipping actually started in Europe among aristocrats and got picked up by Americans by the mid-1800s. Gerald Friedman is an economist at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst.
Rich Americans started going to Europe and coming back with this sense that, oh, we're going to be aristocrats now. And it was a mark that you had been to Europe that you were tipping. Oh, I'm going to tip because that's what we do in Paris.
Strong labor unions in Europe eventually rejected tipping, he says. But in the U.S., the end of slavery actually cemented the practice of tipping in American culture. Saru Jayaraman is the director of the Food Labor Research Center at the University of California, Berkeley. She says companies didn't want to reach into their own pockets to pay recently freed enslaved people.
Train companies hired tens of thousands of Black men, had them work as porters on the trains for no wage, just to live off the tips of the white customers who were traveling. The second industry was the restaurant industry that wanted the right to hire Black people and also not pay them.
Which, she says, left these workers at the mercy of people who may not have actually tipped. So some continued to work for next to nothing at times. There was pushback to the tipping system. It was often called un-American. In 1915, some states banned tipping, but those laws were quickly repealed. A federal minimum wage passed in the 1930s. Here's FDR talking about wages.
But we'll attempt to give to the industrial workers of the country a more fair wage return.
But notice how he says industrial workers. Tipped workers weren't discussed when it came to wages. Reverend William Barber is the president of the nonprofit Repairers of the Breach. He says in part they were left out because
the powerful forces in the South wanted to make sure Black people and Latinos and others did not have the same equal economic status as white workers.
30 years later, after mounting pressure from civil rights activists, many whom themselves were Black workers making extremely low wages, Congress finally did set a standard for tipped workers. Employers would have to pay around half the minimum wage and kick in more if the tips didn't make up the difference. The tipped minimum wage stayed pegged to the regular minimum wage until 1996.
A minimum wage increase jeopardizes existing jobs.
That's Herman Cain, who would become the head of the National Restaurant Association, testifying against a proposal to raise wages. Labor historians say Cain helped push for a compromise. The minimum wage would rise, but the standard for tipped workers would no longer be tied to it. So the tipped minimum stayed at $2.13 and has been there for more than 25 years. Mike Whatley is the vice president for state and local affairs at the National Restaurant Association.
Now is not a time for a massive increase in labor costs for restaurants, but especially upending a system that works for everyone right now.
But how well it works depends on who you are. Several studies have shown that Latinx and Black-tipped workers make significantly less than their white counterparts. Reverend Barber says following a year of racial upheaval, it's time to do away with a practice rooted in slavery.
If you're going to address racism, first of all, you must address racism with an economic lens as well.
7 states already require companies to pay all workers the standard minimum wage, but change on the federal level, that's still being debated. It has been for over 100 years. I'm Jasmine Garst for Marketplace.
Who gets a vaccine and how soon is arguably the public health and the economic question right now. There is no uniform system. States are handling it however they want to handle it. In some places, hospitals are still leading the way on vaccines, first with healthcare workers, now with seniors. But as Blake Farmer reports from WPLN in Nashville, not everybody's real happy with the way things are going.
Coast to coast, millions of seniors are still trying to find the quickest way to get the life-saving COVID vaccine. People like Peggy Burgess of Nashville. She's in her 80s. She heard that a few neighbors who are patients of the local Ascension system, St. Thomas Health, were able to get their shots through their affiliated doctors. But when she called her doctor, initially she was told she didn't qualify.
Even though their offices are there at that medical office building, that doesn't mean that they are St. Thomas doctors.
Burgess didn't think too much of it, but the roadblock she hit has actually become a point of contention in several states between public health officials and hospital systems. In Tennessee, many hospitals got a lot more vaccine than they needed for their staff members, so state health officials said they could give it to their older patients. But then people started to complain about being at a disadvantage just because they don't have the right doctor.
You're not going to see me walking down the street with a sign that says, "Who got my vaccine?" I want it to be fair to everyone, including me.
With enough phone calls, Burgess did get her vaccine through the hospital, which confirms it was limiting vaccinations to existing patients. Turns out one of her specialists is affiliated. There are reports of hospitals in Florida also giving first dibs to their patients. In Louisiana, the state health officer, Dr. Joseph Cantor, warned hospitals and clinics in strong terms. He called giving preference to existing patients discrimination and said the practice had to immediately cease or there could be financial penalties. In Tennessee, the state's health commissioner, Dr. Lisa Piercy, has been rethinking whether hospitals are the best setting to offer vaccines, especially since equity has been a stated goal.
We do not want to put up any barriers whatsoever. And I mean, there could be some substantial barriers for community members going to a hospital if they think they're going to get charged, or if they have an outstanding balance there. They're like, well, I'm not going to go there. They might make me pay my bill.
Piercy's now informed Tennessee hospitals that they will have to welcome all comers to get any more vaccine. She's also instructed hospitals to consider setting up a community site accessible by public transportation.
Going forward, if you want to continue being a site that gets vaccine, you're going to have to step up for the community.
But hospitals in Tennessee have also been informed they're not going to get much vaccine anyway. Rather, local health departments have taken the lead, and instead of hospitals, nonprofit clinics and rural pharmacies are now getting doses. Nationwide, the Biden administration is beginning to ship doses to pharmacies in order to make the vaccination rollout more equitable. However, hospitals in Tennessee are feeling unfairly sidelined, says Dr. Wendy Long. She represents the State Association of Hospitals and says they're uniquely positioned to help.
The majority of hospitals view it as part of their responsibility to the community, to be a part of the vaccination effort and want to be. But they also are just looking for some clear direction.
Long says they would be happy to run community vaccination sites if public health officials would just provide an adequate supply of vaccine. In Nashville, I'm Blake Farmer for Marketplace.
This final note on the way out today, a nod to the way that markets can work in funny ways sometimes. Reddit has, of course, been in the spotlight lately at the center of the GameStop trading frenzy. GameStop shares today, by the way, if I could do a little sidebar here, down another 16% to $50 a share, 50. The high, if I remember right, was like in the upper 400s or something. Anyway, Reddit, which is still privately held, is making some hay while the sun shines. The company announced yesterday it has raised a new round of investment that values it at $6 billion. Never hurts to raise money when there is an opportunity to do so, CEO Steve Huffman said. And then he went on, and Reddit had a strong year.
Marketplace is supported by St. Martin's Press, publishers of Working Backwards by Bill Carr and Colin Breyer, an insider's view of Amazon's best practices that anyone can adapt for themselves. And by C3.ai. C3.ai software enables organizations to use artificial intelligence at enterprise scale, solving previously unsolvable business problems. Learn more at C3.ai. And by GEP, helping transform supply chains with strategy, services, and software, including GEP Smart and GEP Next, AI-based digital procurement and supply chain platforms.
All right, we got to go, but here's your Tuesday moment of economic context. It's more curiosity, I guess, than anything else. We mentioned real quickly yesterday in the numbers that Tesla, Elon Musk's electric car company, had disclosed in a filing with the SEC that it had bought $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin. Since then, the cryptocurrency has gone from $39,000 per Bitcoin to, one day later, $47,000. Somebody please help me make sense of that, huh? Our digital and on-demand team is Ufuk Memetolu, Olga Oxman, Erica Phillips, Brian Ronahan, and Tony Wagner. Sitar Nieves is our executive director of On Demand. I'm Kai Rizal. We will see you tomorrow, everybody. This is APM.